You look at the events in the Middle East, especially in Israel, and it seems like a never-ending battle. Just in the last year, the events that have transpired and continue to transpire, painful, tragic, atrocities, senseless, deaths, the hostages, and the continuing threats from Iran and all its proxies. You can't help but wonder, will the war in Israel ever end? And especially when you consider that this is not the beginning. It's been going on for years, for decades, for centuries, for millennia. You go back in the last few decades, from 1948, you have the Independence War, then you have the War of Attrition in the 50s, and the Six-Day War in 1967, the Yom Kippur War in 1973, then the Lebanese War, the Intifadas, and now this. And when you look at it, it doesn't seem like there's any end to it. I mean, there were wars in history that lasted for years, but this is literally for millennia. Let's go back before 1948. From the beginning of time, biblical times, you find literally Abraham, talking about close to 4,000 years ago, fighting the wars in this part of the world. And you move along in the biblical story as the Jews leave Egypt and then return to the Promised Land. Furthermore, more wars. They finally settle, they build a temple, and again, faced with challenges from the Assyrians and then the Babylonians, who destroyed the first temple, only to be rebuilt 70 years later, but then again under attack. The Persians, the Greeks, Syrians, and then finally the Romans, who destroyed the second temple. But it doesn't end there. The battles continue. You have the Romans, of course, and then the Byzantines, and the Ottomans, and you throw in the Crusades in the middle. And then when Islam is born in the 7th century, the wars of the Islamites, the different empires. I mentioned the Ottomans ultimately. On and on and on and on. So what is going on here? And is there hope? Is there hope in sight? Or are we doomed to a fatal battle? But to be able to answer that question, we have to also understand, what are we battling over? You know, it's one thing if Israel had the richest reservoirs of resources. It's a beautiful country, a country of milk and honey, a country blessed in many different ways. But there's something far deeper that is the root of all the battles. So we need to understand that. And that can help us find ways, explore ways, that perhaps there can finally be a permanent and sustainable conclusion to all these battles. So there's, like everything, there are things you deal with through the symptoms, Band-Aids, painkillers, and the ultimate way to solve things is through the root, getting to the root of it. Now, we're not being naive here and suggesting you can just come up with some formula, solved. You're dealing with millions, billions of people, and as I said, centuries, millennia of battles. But we got to begin, and it's important for us to understand. I think a good way to phrase it is actually using the biblical term of Jacob himself. Jacob of the patriarchs. So we're talking now 3,500 years ago, at least. Probably more like 3,700 years ago. So Jacob falls asleep on what would be the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, which is, of course, ground zero. That's the central point. You hear about the Al-Aqsa, what they call desecrations that the Muslims and the Arabs try to use as an excuse to fight war. Al-Aqsa is a mosque on the Temple Mount. You have, of course, the temple, you have the other mosque. And the Temple Mount, why is it called the Temple Mount? Because both temples, the holy temples, were there long before the mosques, long before Islam was born in the first place. So you can say ground zero, the central point, is in Israel itself, Jerusalem, in Jerusalem itself, the old city, and in the old city itself, the Temple Mount. What does Jacob call the Temple Mount? When he wakes up and he realizes this is a holy place, he says, this is a gate to heaven. A gate to heaven. The big question, where does heaven meet earth? Right there. And this, my friends, I submit, is the heart and soul and the root of everything. Everybody wants to control this gate, this interface, the ultimate interface between heaven and earth, between spirit and matter, between soul and body, between the spiritual and the physical. So consciously or subconsciously, this is what everyone wants control over. Because in a sense, it's not just control in the sense who's going to own it. It's the control to the very key to finding true balance in this world. Everyone will claim, especially in the religious context, that we want to fulfill God's purpose in this world. And you read some of the Muslim fundamentalist texts, and you'll see it's about us, the Muslims, being chosen by God to bring the divine into this world. Where the Jews and the Christians, the Judeo-Christian, have corrupting and trying to undermine the infidels of the West, God's plan. This lies at the heart of it. Don't be deceived by all the propaganda. It's about a few olive groves, or because some people were displaced in 1948. Not even getting into that. The Jews were displaced more than anybody, if you want to talk about displacement. But regardless, even if those are grievances that need to be addressed, that's not where it began. And that's why you find battles going back centuries and millennia. Called the Holy Land, the Promised Land, for a reason. So it doesn't matter how large it is. It's very small, actually, Israel. But it lies at the heart. That's where the gateway is. The gateway, the interface. The Western world refuses to acknowledge, for many reasons, that this is a religious war. But it is a religious war. Not that everybody fighting it believes that. Even many Israelis don't. But that's the heart of it. What does the Muslim world have against Israel? Why just let them be? Because there's something about controlling the promised land that states that you are fulfilling God's purpose in this world. Now, of course, there are many things that have happened since, so now it has many derivatives and many other reasons and causes. But that's what the heart of it all is. And that's why the war does not seem to have an end. Because you're not talking about, an end of a war has to require goals. What are the goals? So as obscene and as disturbing and as, I don't even have the right adjective, that of the Nazi plans, it was clear what they wanted. That the Aryans are the superior race, Lebensraum, get rid of all the inferiors, that they control the world. In their demonic view, what they had. But we knew what it was. And it had to be stopped, and it was stopped. Every war has some type of goal. Some wars are actually vengeance, to exact vengeance on your enemy. Some wars are over land, over power, over resources, control. Here, what is the goal? What would be victory? From the river to the sea, eliminate all Jews, all Israel, God forbid? But why? What's your objective? The answer ultimately is a spiritual one. And it's the Jewish people, and then Christianity that finally came to understand that it's not through violence and war that we achieve God's plan in this world. It's through peace, through inspiration, through education. So the Muslims will have to go through their market correction, their reality check, to put it mildly. But that is what it's all about. And I wish it was stated clearly. But people have to camouflage it. Because many will not accept, especially in the Western world, that this is the war. So it's packaged in all types of ways. The complete false narrative and propaganda of colonialism and apartheid and genocide. And others will state the inhumanity of stealing the land and property of our grandparents, meaning the grandparents of Muslim Arabs. But it really comes down to a far more spiritual and religious core behind it all. So therefore the solution also has to be one of such. Because even if you create two states, everybody understands it's not going to go anywhere because one state wants the other to disappear. So it'll just become a launch pad, exactly what happened in Gaza. They built tunnels, they built a war machine. And what's happening in northern Israel, in Lebanon, southern Lebanon. Because that doesn't solve the problem. It's not just, people are not fighting for land. They're fighting for the ownership of the gateway to heaven. So really the ultimate solution is showing that there's a gateway to heaven for everybody. For Jews, Christians, and Muslims, for agnostics and atheists, for Buddhists, Hindus. Go through the whole list. For everyone, because everybody was created in the divine image. That's what we have in common. It's the only true thing we have in common. So Israel, even though a promised land for the Jewish people, it's not only for the Jewish peoples, for the purpose of the Jewish peoples, it's for the purpose of the entire world. That's why the Medrash says something very powerful. That if the nations of the world knew the blessings and the gifts that they received from this gateway to heaven, from this interface, from Jerusalem, from the temple, from Israel, instead of attacking Israel, instead of criticizing, they would surround it with legions to protect it because that's where their blessings are coming from. And as you read in the prophets that all major religions accept, that this house shall be a house of prayer for all nations. And the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. And from Zion will come Torah and the word of God from Jerusalem. It's not just Torah and the word of God for certain individuals, for every human being. A blueprint for existence, a blueprint for life. When you think about it, and you close your eyes and dream for a moment, you think, isn't that something that every human being on earth would love to embrace? So why is there war? Why is there battle? Why can't we just understand that we're all created by one God, each in our own way serving God, and we actually synergize and complement each other? That's the ultimate victory in this battle and war. It's not a war that one wins and one loses. It's win-win or lose-lose. And I speak now from the Jewish perspective. It's not about Israel winning over its enemies. That has to happen because you have enemies who are sworn to your destruction, so you need to fight them and eliminate them. But the real success, the real victory is won when the entire world, not just Israel, the entire world lives in peace. The entire world sees and benefits from the blessings that come through the gateway, this interface between heaven and earth. So you can argue that until Israel does not have a leadership that states these goals, these spiritual goals, these visionary, transcendent goals, it's going to ultimately be a battle. So I totally agree that we should have leaders that have that. But until that point, we need to continue to pass this message on and propagate and perpetuate it and disseminate it. I have no doubt if Israel would spend time articulating this and believing it, it would have tremendous impact, even on countries like Iran. I'm not, again, being naive and suggesting it just happens quickly, but it has to come from the heart. So you can say in a way that the secularization of the West, the secularization of the world, in a way undermines this type of battle. I mean, if you really want to be somewhat audacious, you can say that maybe this is a wake-up call that the ultimate goal in life has to be finding peace with God, harmony between heaven and earth. And as long as we don't need that, we don't do that, and we worship materialism, there is always going to be an inherent tension. The reason I hesitate saying that, because I don't want in any way give any merit or justification to the atrocities that I don't even call savage, worse than savage, that were done on October 7th and have continued to be done. The holding of hostages, little children, babies, elderly, everything that defies even basic civil behavior, let alone godly behavior. But from the lessons learned is, yes, ultimately the real correction will happen when we transform the very education and schooling of the children that are being taught hate as we speak. Because at the end of the day, as much as we must fight a war to protect ourselves and protect innocent people, which is the essence of what is happening right now, we have to also fight the bigger war of what are the roots behind it all. And that is where there's much less conversation. But when you see something going on and seemingly endless, it compels us, it behooves us, it forces us to look inside this inside story. What is going on behind the scenes? And hence, this discussion. But human nature is we will be lulled back into complacency, especially when things quiet down. Things were quieting down in a way, even though they weren't. Hostages, as we speak, are suffering. Their families are suffering. Thousands of people have been killed. There's a war raging. But at least on the headlines, it didn't seem to dominate. But then you have Iran. And then you have the Hezbollah, and you have the other attacks, just to wake us up and not to let us go to sleep. So the short term, we understand what needs to be done. You need to eliminate Nazis. You need to eliminate anyone that calls for your destruction. That's not even a question. The only way to win that war is through total surrender, unconditional surrender, return of all the hostages, untouched, healthy, intact, elimination of all calls for the destruction of a people and a country, namely Hamas's call, Iran's call, and so on. That is a given. And not buy into all the propaganda and the false narratives around that. But the bigger issue is the longer term, is understanding that we need to protect and preserve the gate to heaven, the bridge between heaven and earth. And that's a blessing for everybody. What do you think would happen if we had a spiritual leader? Not imposing his or her beliefs on anyone, but that would state this case in an open call to all Muslims, to all Christians, to all Jews, to all people. What do you think would happen? It would give us all a ray of hope, because that's where we can find common ground. Everything else is not even going to be a Band-Aid. There's too much hate and acrimony. Which unfortunately we must deal with. But at the same time, we cannot ignore that bigger picture. So I don't want anyone to get the wrong impression. This isn't about just escaping into some type of idealistic, dream of a utopian future, it's very clear that we have to fight the battles that we have to fight and have the total clarity and moral clarity. But we cannot forget that bigger picture. So I feel, in a sense, compelled to say this. Not because I'm the only one that understands it this way, but I just don't hear it being stated anywhere. Or very, very, very quietly, definitely not dominating headlines. This should be the biggest headline. You want an end to this war? Let us find that spiritual common ground. Let us come to appreciate the blessing of Israel, the blessing of the Holy Land, the blessing of the Temple Mount, the bridge between heaven and earth for all of us, for all men, women, and children on this earth. With practical ways to implement that, what we teach our children on a daily basis, through study, through prayer, through good deeds, through kindness, through love, through unity. There's so much to fight for. But we have to give ourselves and others hope of a positive. Right now, it's all about, on all sides, it's all about removing toxins. Everyone feels the other the enemy. Removing the enemy, and everyone feels the other is the enemy. What do we have in common? There's no conversation there at all. So it becomes all completely distracted by negotiations, quote unquote. They're going where? To do what? To achieve what? To buy time? To put out one fire when there's so many others burning? The hatred itself is burning. It's time to finally say, 1 second, there's a bigger picture here. I'm not sure what else I can do to bring together and hopefully expose all the leaders in all the countries, whether it's Israel, whether it's Hamas leaders, whether it's Iranian leaders, whether it's Saudi Arabia, the rest of the world, into this conversation. Is it possible? I believe it is. But it's going to require absolute strength, because some people will not respond without strength. They'll just see it as weakness if you start just having a philosophical, theological dialogue. But also introducing these principles, these ideas, and these guidelines. So it's a tall order, but you know what? History deserves it. We deserve it. All people, all good people deserve it. May we merit to see in our time, not just the conversation unfolding, but really developing into a new world order with a new spiritual revolution that will affect and transform us all. This has been Simon Jacobson. MeaningfulLife.com is our website where you can find this and many other programs, a wide array, literally covering every topic. Please subscribe to our offerings, to our growing and robust YouTube channel. Please share. And I'd love to hear your thoughts, your feedbacks, your comments. Thank you again. Be blessed, and may we merit to see this world where there will be no more evil or destruction, because the world will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea.
This program is brought to you by the Meaningful Life Center. Please help us continue our programs. Make even a small contribution at meaningfullife.com/donate.